Welcome to the channel. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Remember to like and subscribe if you like this content. We have reviews, we have discussions on gun rights, we have discussions on all sorts of important topics that cover Canadian gun ownership here in the Great White North. And I thought I'd make a video to explain to my viewers what it would look like if, or what are the questions a lot of people are asking if Canada became a 51st state. A lot of people out there are giving a lot of information about gun rights in the United States and thinking that this is a one-stop solution to dealing with the OIC and to dealing with a lot of issues in relation to gun rights, aside from the possible election of a conservative government, which now, as a majority government, might look less likely. We might even look at the return of a liberal government in Canada. So let's talk about the political changes, what we're seeing right now, and what could happen in looking at three different scenarios. So a lot of people online have been talking about the first scenario, and I'm going to make this a quick video where somehow there would be a form of uh, conquest or some sort of integration of Canada into the United States, which I think is the most unlikely scenario, but a lot of people well, a lot of people on the fringe of this community are talking about this being a good thing because it would address their primary concern about gun rights in Canada. For people to understand that portion of it, you also have to understand what gun rights look like in the US. And being that Canada as a whole, even in its most conservative uh, parts, is very liberal, is very very liberal minded in the way we sort of configure ourselves politically. It is more likely that you will see if some sort of scenario of disintegration of Canada, of the integration of disintegration, integration of Canada in the United States would look like, you'd probably have gun laws, and that would be more like what you see in California. And Californian gun rights, well, gun rights in California are still very similar to what you see here in Canada. There are still the same magazine limits. You still have, aside from handguns, you still have a lot of limitations and a lot of processes to get to the state of gun ownership or to the firearm ownership, which in some ways look a lot like what you see in the U.S. Now, because of what we've seen with the Type 81s and the way a lot of foreign imported, especially from China, guns and firearms that came into the U.S. were now banned. Because why can't you get a Type 81 in the U.S.? Why has there been a lot of local manufacturing of firearms? Is because the U.S. itself bans the importation of a lot of these type of firearms. So again, you wouldn't be seeing, if in the case of an integration, you wouldn't be seeing these firearms anymore in Canada because of the politics of the United States. So, in French we say deux poids, deux mesures, which means, one thing balances out the other. There's advantages, there's disadvantages. Of course, you could say on the other side that there's a lot of local manufacture of AK-47 derivatives in the United States. But in this first scenario, what you see here is that there would be probably a change in gun laws, which would bring us into what you see in states like some of the more liberal states, which still come with a lot of limitations. I'll spare you the amount of limitations you see in some states like New York, which are even more severe in some cases, but there will still be a very present process in qualifying people for firearm ownership. So it is not a one-stop solution. And I think it's important to say because Canada won't become Kentucky or Florida overnight. And even in Florida, uh, conceal and carry, there's classes, there's a whole process to it. As someone who has, used firearms in Florida and who has gone to gun clubs and who knows the process there, I can tell you that it's not as simple as a lot of people want you to make it sound. Well, one, that they want to make it sound, quite simply put. The second scenario is, will the election of a minority conservative government still impact by October, when the deadlines are coming for the buyback of these the firearms that were put as restricted or completely banned under the new OIC, would a minority conservative government impact the ownership of those firearms? And I think that it depends again what the alliances are going to look like and what everything's going to look like at the end. But those governments can still impact OICs. There are measures in place, which if the Poilievre government wants to apply those measures, that would make these firearms, these semi-automatic firearms, well, I would say permissible to own again. But what I expect will probably happen was that there will be a form of grandfathering of people who already have these semi-automatic firearms, saying that they're fine, but they won't be able to bring in or buy or purchase more semi-automatic firearms. I wouldn't be surprised that we see this sort of legislative change coming on board, because people forget again, we did see new firearm restrictions, form of restrictions under the Harper government. We have seen these restrictions before, and we shouldn't be surprised at these restrictions maybe lightening up in some way, but also becoming more not so much grandfathered, but more practical. Becoming more practical in the way they're implemented societally. That is one thing that we should see, I think, with a Poilievre government, because at the end of the day, a minority Poilievre government will have to have alliances to function properly. I mean, we see what it is now with a minority liberal government, with the amount of people who are looking at ways of, whether it's the NDP or the Conservatives, to make that government lose a non-confidence vote. That could easily happen to a Poilievre government. The other side of what we think will happen, which is the election of a liberal government, would probably be, for Canadian firearm owners, the worst case scenario. Because I fully expect that whether it's Mark Carney or any of the people who will sort of integrate this coalition, that not only will we see the completion of those projects and those OICs, but I wouldn't be surprised that with an empowered new liberal government, there will be even more restrictions placed on firearm ownership. And obviously, I also expect that there will be also an additional souring of the relationship with the United States, which will probably add a new extreme to what we're seeing with the way the government sort of, and this happens a lot in these cases, the way they harden on policy. And I would expect a lot of hardening from the liberals when it comes to the way they implement policy, if they are given an additional mandate, which is their right. This is sort of how it works in Canada, and how people sort of not only put in place governments, but put in place governments with mandates, especially in situations where there is a crisis. And presently, we have a crisis with the United States. It's not just the tariffs, it is an existential crisis to a large extent. And I go out of my way not to judge where people position themselves politically. You can be liberal. I mean, in my life, I voted conservative, I voted liberal, I voted NDP, I voted where the importance of policy was for me. So I go with the important parts of policy that matter to me, my business, and how my life is structured. And you should vote with your conscience as well. To quote Ted Cruz a few, what was it, like 5-6 years ago at that Republican convention. Always interesting, right? What's going on with our neighbors in the South. So there is that portion of it. Another part that is important to bring to this equation too, which is that you want to make sure that you get your news from the proper source when it comes to firearm regulation in Canada. There's a great subreddit on the website Reddit called Canada Guns, where there are forms of discussion on the subject with people who are a lot more qualified than me from a legal standpoint to discuss this. So I strongly encourage everyone to have a look at those Reddits to get the proper information, as well as what we're seeing coming in from the government, because there are a fair bit of very qualified people who will do a fair bit of analytics. But let's come back to our principal point, which is that there is no perfect solution to what we're going through with these OICs and with these semi-automatic weapon bans. The best thing we can do as Canadians right now is to make our voices heard with our elected representatives. And that is, again, a very important part of this process. Whining won't get us anything. Threatening our lawmakers won't get us anything, but to harden them even further in the direction of their beliefs. Discussion and the ability to have a proper communication channel to discuss what's important in the case of our hobby, which is whether it's hunting or firearm shooting, is important. So I encourage you to keep the discussion open, to keep talking to each other, and to remember that at the end of the day, we are Canadians. Canada is a real country. It's as much a real country as any other country out there. You know, people will tell you the US is a real country and Canada is not a real country. Well, it's about a hundred or so years ago where the north and the south of the United States were killing each other in a civil war. Every country goes through its ups and downs. Every country has moments in its existence where policy will create unimaginable division, especially in how polarized we are nowadays. But remember, whether it's your neighbors, your family, people all around you, what makes us Canadian is our ability to communicate with each other, our ability to integrate to each other, whether your neighbors are originally from Southeast Asia, from Italy, from Southeast Europe, from Northern Europe, from Bangladesh, from India, from everywhere. We are a mosaic of cultures that coexist together and that show a standard to humanity of what coexistence is like. And I encourage it to also transfer to the way we approach firearm ownership. And I've brought it up in other videos. The grassroots movements in universities at every level is doing a fantastic job. We have to remember that our real investment, no matter what we lose now, on the long ball, on the long term here, is going to be to show that there is a lot of benefits to firearm ownership, whether it's on a sporting standpoint, whether it's whether you go hunting with your kids or with your family. It's an amazing way to spend time together and to also integrate yourself to nature and help nature in the way we are doing by controlling herds and doing everything we are doing. To my American friends watching this, there is one message I want to say that is very clear: is we love America. You've been our neighbors. You've been our friends. We've fought side by side with you in so many conflicts. We've been there for you. We had one of the. I'm a big fan of the Avro Arrow and its history. We gave up on domestic manufacturing of our military industry, whether it was for the Beaumarks or for the Voodoo jets, because we believed that integrating to your military industrial complex instead of building our own was also a show of friendship on our part and a show of participation in the greater good of defending our lands. You have to remember one thing: we are different culturally. We are different in so many ways, but we're also so much alike. But the way we keep those differences, the way we keep that unity of what's going on in the north, up north over here, and what's going on with you guys uh, in the US is by a strong form of respect that we've always had towards each other. I know that right now that respect is being tested very strongly. People are booing national anthems, and there is an antagonism between our two cultures. But a few months can't erase centuries of history, proven history, whether it's in the trenches of World War One, whether it's storming beaches, whether it's in Afghanistan. We've stood by each other. And the best thing you can do for us right now is stand by the fact that Canada is a good friend to you when we stand on our own, side by side. That's all I wanted to say. So thank you for listening. I'll be posting more firearm reviews down the line. There's not a lot of opportunities to get firearms lately, but I'll be posting more stuff. Thanks again for tuning in, and have yourself a wonderful Sunday. Winter is ending. Hopefully, warmer days are ahead, not just on the weather, but with with what's the relations between our cross-border friends in the United States. Take care.